Our speaker today is Dr. Lynn Etta Manning. Dr. Manning is the advisor for women students and has been here for the last 12 years. She received her bachelor's degree in education from SMU and her master's in Christian education from here at DTS, along with her doctor of ministry, specializing in mentoring from DTS. Her ministry experience outside of her role at DTS has included women's ministry, prayer ministry, hospital visitation ministry, serving as chaplain at Baylor Hospital. Yeah, chaplain, there you go. And several years serving in overseas missions teaching. Lynn Etta and her husband Mike were married for 37 years until Mike died in 2009. They're the proud parents of 2 adult married children. She thanks the Lord for her children, for having given her the joy of being a grandparent, stumbling there, of 5 grandsons, ages 2 to 12. Lynn Etta enjoys spending her free time doing artwork, calligraphy, decorating, cooking, and entertaining, as well as being a personal skincare consultant for Rodan and Fields. Please join with me in welcoming Dr. Lynn Etta Manning to our chapel today.
Thank you. Makes me feel better when you stumbled. I don't have to worry about if I stumble. Well, good morning. It's so good to be here, and it's good to see each one of you. Well, I am not a runner. You can tell that by looking at me. But I used to be a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. But I do have friends that I talk to who are runners. I watch runners, and I've learned things from them. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the different types of runners that I've noticed. There's those that you see that are miserable, and they're suffering, and they're stressed out while they're running. And you can tell that by the expression on their faces and the way they lift their feet. And then there's those that are running, and you can tell they're on their last leg and they're not going to make it because they're constantly looking behind them to see who's coming up, or they're looking around and they're thinking, somebody else is going to beat me. And so you know they're not going to cross the finish line. And then there are those that run, odd to me, but they run and they look like they're enjoying it. They run with delight, they've got a great expression on their face, and they have a certain pace. They tend to know what they're doing. They look comfortable. So when you watch runners in a race, you can notice something about their techniques or their strategies that they use while they run. And it helps them to survive the race. It helps them to run the race with a pace that they can keep. And it makes them want to run again when they run it correctly. And one of those strategies, I think, would help us as Christians to run the race that's set before each one of us. And that is to pace for the race. Depending on the length of the race makes all the difference in the world how you're going to pace for the race. If it's a sprint, from the very get-go, right out of the chocks, you are running full bore all the way to the finish line. If it's a marathon, it's a whole different strategy. You've got a long way to run, so you're not going to run a sprint the entire way. If you try, you're not going to make it. If it's a long race, the passion to finish the race has to be greater than the stress on the body, the pain that it's causing, or any of the suffering that you might be going through, for blisters on your feet, the sweat that's running in your eyes, whatever it might be. Because you see, these runners have the perseverance because they have learned what it takes to pace for the race, because they can see the end goal that they want to reach. But those that focus on the pain or the suffering, or they're stressed out, or they're comparing themselves to others, or they try to sprint for the whole marathon, they begin to lag, they begin to fail, they begin to fall behind, they become discouraged, become defeated, and they stop running. But those that keep perspective, they understand the benefits and joys of finishing the race. They pace themselves for the race, and they're able to make the suffering, the pain, and the circumstances work for them and to pace themselves to finish the race. I think we lose concept of this idea a whole lot in our Christian walk, especially when the going gets tough, when things aren't going the way that we thought they were going to go. As important as pacing is for the race for a runner, pacing for the race is important for us as Christians. This principle is just as true for you younger ones that are in here. You may think, oh, this is not for me because I'm young. I can make the sprint all the way. But it's important for you to know that you're going to have to pace for the race as well. And it's important for all of us that are older in this room because we've been on this race a long time now, but we're not done yet. So there's still a pace that we've got to keep, and we've got to figure out what that pace is. But we all have one pace that we need to keep, and we need to keep it by keeping perspective. Many of you know, as Chaplain said, here I'm stumbling, I am the advisor for women students. And many of you, because of that, know my personal story, or you may know because I've spoken in chapel before and shared about that story with my husband, and great loss and great grief. And I'm not going to bore you with repeating it again. And if you want to hear it, you can go online and hear it in previous chapel messages. But he battled with cancer for 9 years, and I lost him 7 years ago after a valiant battle with that cancer. And since that time, I've walked the walk of grief, great grief, stress, change, and sacrifice in my own life, adjusting to life without him. I've had to let go of hopes and dreams and things that I thought were going to happen because we had a life together. And I had to let it go in order to embrace the new life and the new race that the Lord has set before me now. So today I want to share with you what I've learned about pacing for the race through keeping perspective. I used to think that the scriptures were those that focused on joy in the midst of suffering or pain were just for helping us to change our attitude and to come into the power of positive thinking. But since I've tested those scriptures and I've walked through that valley and I have used those scriptures over and over and over again, I realize it's not the power of positive thinking that's going on. I have trusted the Lord in no matter what the circumstances have been, and I've found that there's a different understanding of the purpose of suffering and stress and the importance of perspective. And it's no wonder we're given the picture of Jesus and the suffering that he endured in Hebrews 12, 1 through 3. And it should be on the slide up here. You can read along with me. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Because Jesus kept focused on the amazing future beyond the immediate difficulty and suffering, and because he knew the goal for the race that the Father had set before him, he was able to keep perspective and endure. He did not lose heart. He submitted to the Father's will for his life. He wasn't spared from suffering and pain in this world. So we can expect that we will escape this earthly life with some suffering, some pain, and some discomfort and stress. But he is the perfecter of our faith, and he is in there in those times with us. And with his help, we don't have to lose heart because he is our helper, he is our comforter, and he is our Savior to enable us to finish the race. If we can keep the perspective we have been blessed to have because of Jesus, then we can finish the race and we can run it with great joy. With my responsibility here as the DTS Women's Advisor, I have the privilege to counsel and mentor the women students. And many times the issues that I have to address is perspective. It's so easy to lose perspective when things are going a different direction and what we had hoped for isn't happening, or maybe what we've dreamed is shattered, or what we've desired is no longer a possibility, or we get tired, or when we feel alone, or we're discouraged. So listen and just see if you identify with any of these situations and if they touch a tender spot of pain, struggle, or stress in your life. Disappointment, betrayal by a trusted friend, Closed doors for ministry opportunity over and over and over again. Loss of a loved one and deep, deep grief. Fear of anything. Not enough finances to make ends meet, and you're already working 3 jobs and carrying 12 hours to survive. A relationship that didn't work out the way that you thought it was going to or wanted it to. Rejection, difficulty in marriage, discouragement, illness, that of your own or someone that you love. Comparison, you think you just don't measure up, or you're not as smart or as capable, as rich or attractive, or have the same opportunities as someone else. Seemingly unanswered prayers over and over and over again. Disappointing grades after you studied hard and you spent many hours writing and going over your notes, and still the grade isn't what you expected. Loss of a job or not getting the job that you wanted. A rebellious child or children. Infertility or the loss of a baby. Depression or burnout. Struggles and pain and stress are tough, and we don't like to suffer. We don't want to be stressed. We don't want to be in pain, and we often try our best to avoid all of those things. However, there is purpose in suffering. There is purpose in struggling and pain and stress if we have the right perspective. I'm going to a cruise to Alaska in just a few days. So I've been thinking about all the wonderful seafood that we're going to have, particularly lobster. I know you're thinking, what does going on a cruise have to do with suffering, stress, and pain? You're right. I hear you. What does that have to do with our Christian walk? Well, all this pondering about lobster led me to do some research on lobsters. And what I found has everything to do with understanding stress, suffering, vulnerability, and growth. Take a look at this short video about a lobster's life by Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky.
Something I want to tell you about the stress and how we have to look at stress, okay? And I think it's an important thing because many people have told me from my lectures it's the one thing they remember, okay? I was sitting in a dentist's office and looked at an article that said, how do lobsters grow? Well, I don't care how lobsters grow. But I was interested in it. And it points out that a lobster is a soft, mushy animal that lives inside of a rigid shell. That rigid shell does not expand. Well, how can the lobster grow? Well, as the lobster grows, that shell becomes very confining. Right? And the lobster feels itself under pressure and uncomfortable. It goes under a rock formation to protect itself from predatory fish, casts off the shell, and produces a new one. Well, eventually, that shell becomes very uncomfortable as it grows, right? Back under the rocks. Good. And the lobster repeats this numerous times. The stimulus for the lobster to be able to grow is that it feels uncomfortable. Right? Now, if lobsters had doctors, they would never grow. Because as soon as the lobster feels uncomfortable, goes to the doctor, gets a Valium, gets a Percocet, feels fine, never gets off its shell. So I think that we have to realize that times of stress are also times that are signals for growth. And if we use adversity properly, we can grow through adversity.
Amen. So in order to grow, even the lobster has to embrace the struggle and stress of outgrowing that protective shell. He has to endure that struggle to shed that shell that's too small. And he has to be very vulnerable for a while until that shell hardens, when God does only what God can do, and that's replacing that new shell. And without that repetitive struggling and uncomfortable progress, that lobster will never grow to reach its full potential. And we don't grow and reach our God-given potential unless we embrace God's process in our lives. Suffering and stress are a part of life. Pain, suffering, stress, each makes us vulnerable, but it's the only way that we're going to grow. Suffering embraced will work in your favor as you keep perspective. This is what Jesus did when he faced the cross. He knew the joy that was set before him, and he kept focused on that. No wonder Paul gives us the exhortation in Philippians 4:4-9. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition. And with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And then Paul goes on to say, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. This is not the power of positive thinking. This is putting into practice pace for the race by keeping the right perspective. God's ways are perfect and his timing is perfect. Whatever you're going through, there's something that you're supposed to learn from the experience. It may be painful today, but tomorrow will show that it had purpose for your good and for his glory. Stay focused on the joy that's been set before you because of Christ. Maybe you're suffering today, but like the lobster, unless there's suffering and vulnerability, there can be no growth. And like the runner, unless you pace the race, you're not going to finish. And like Jesus, it takes perspective to stay focused on the prize set before us. Suffering strengthens and sharpens our perspective and sharpens our walk if we will allow it. Things not going the way you want them to, disappointed or discouraged, sad and grieving, betrayed or hurt, enduring loss or difficulty, maxed out, stressed out, or burned out. Stay focused, and instead of thinking negatively and being defeated, think on whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable. This is perspective to pace for the race. Always remember that God calls you to serve him, and he wants to use you, but he doesn't want to kill you. You do that to yourself. If you've been in my office very much, you've heard that once before. Remember, God, through Isaiah 46, also says, even into your old age and gray hairs, I am he who will sustain you. I have made you. I will carry you. I will sustain you, and I will rescue. It's all about God. Remember that, to keep your perspective, to pace for the race. Pacing for the race takes perspective. And if your struggle is just that you can't refocus and you can't find a new perspective, seek someone out. We're here. We're here to help you. God's placed lots of people around you to help you walk through that. Christ is with each one of us, and he's calling us each into a deeper walk with him. That intimacy, that dependency, and that deeper walk will not and usually won't happen without some stress, suffering, pain, vulnerability, and difficulty in our lives. He is worth our focus. Our calling is our privilege and our blessing. Keep your perspective on the goal that's worthy of finishing the race to gain. Run your race well, allow him to grow you, and finish the race that he set before you. To pace for the race, it takes perspective.